Chapter 591, Taming the Swarm 6. In the distance, a third massive signature was approaching fast, and the defenses that had seemed so stable minutes before suddenly felt very fragile. The revelation that their most powerful tamer couldn't stop the threat sent a chill through everyone present that had nothing to do with Selphira's ice magic. If freezing couldn't contain these creatures, what could? The question hung in the air, while in the distance, the sound of cracking ice grew louder with each passing moment. A little earlier, on the northern side of the defensive perimeter, the group of 10 girls, 3 maids and 4 guards accompanying the 3 princesses, arrived at the northern sector when the situation was already more or less organized under established command. At the head of operations in this sector was Lady Morgaine, a moderately prominent noble from Goldcrest territory with a solid local military reputation. She was being directly supported by Lord Aldrich of the Galehearts, a quite influential house from Starweaver territory, which would have been good for Luna. But Lord Aldrich had connections with the Blackwoods and Strawfangs that significantly complicated his loyalties. The political web was as complex as it was treacherous, alliances built on mutual benefit rather than genuine trust, ready to shift the moment circumstances changed. Larissa knew their political networks more or less through previous investigations she had conducted for fun and as part of her special in-house education. Based on discrete movements between noble houses thanks to years of careful observation of Arturo's meticulous tax collections, she had managed to deduce their real friendships and enmities behind public diplomatic facades. Thanks to the kingdom's collection system, which used specialized beasts for tracking financial movements, there were always development priorities for the best monitoring techniques when it came to money. Many true alliances ended up being deduced by her. It was done through extrapolating territorial economic behaviors, looking at the commercial facilities that allies gave each other and how they were systematically removed from enemies. The fact that it wasn't Aldrich, but Morgaine who was here directly managing operations, was also a calculated political maneuver. Aldrich at least technically belonged to this territory, which gave him certain legitimacy to defend it and would affect Sirius less. But the fact that he was present here without being in command was probably only to facilitate soldiers paying attention and following orders from someone they didn't recognize as local authority. While observing how they gave orders from an elevated position, Larissa immediately realized that Luna would have to supplant Lady Morgaine without affecting the already well-structured stability of the defense, which would surely be extremely complicated. Started with the fact that Luna was clearly a child, and it would be difficult for her to get attention compared to an experienced noble like Morgaine. But with the official document they had obtained, maybe they could create an interesting situation that would force recognition. "We have to be very careful," Larissa murmured while studying the positions of soldiers and the visible chain of command. Morgaine has a reputation for being ruthless with challenges to her authority, especially from people she considers beneath her station. "And Aldrich?" Leora asked, evaluating the man who had clearly positioned himself as backup power. "Aldrich is more pragmatic. If he can see benefits or detriments that make him desist, he'll do it." The girls first headed toward the top of the wall to get a better view of the situation and make their presence known more effectively. Mayo's Royal Cloudbird and Ikari's Mega Firefly carried those who couldn't make spatial jumps by themselves. The ascent was quick and agile, though several soldiers visibly worried upon seeing girls arriving in an active combat zone. But the soldiers also quickly realized these were the princesses, since very few people in the kingdom could make spatial jumps. Recognition changed their concern to curiosity mixed with respect. From the top of the wall created by Selphira, the girls could see the massive line of mutants directly for the first time. The sight was genuinely intimidating. Thousands of creatures extended the horizon, a writhing mass of corrupt forms that seemed endless. The constant sound of combat, explosions, the clash of fire against chitin, minerals, and skin created a cacophony that made normal conversation difficult. The scale was beyond anything they had imagined, even after hearing descriptions from those who had faced these creatures before. "By the dragons," Matilda whispered, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the threat. Leora, however, maintained focus on tactics. For original chapters, go to novel_read.net. "We should first show a bit of our power," she told Luna with boldness. "If we don't demonstrate competence immediately, they're going to dismiss us as girls playing games." Larissa was completely in agreement. "Exactly. And from up here, many soldiers will be able to see us. We need to create an impression that forces people to take us seriously." Luna nodded, already calculating possibilities. To start, Leora's showy black fire, augmented by our wind elemental control, fired against the beast's line, would be a good way to establish credibility. It was a sound plan. Combined elemental attacks of the magnitude they could achieve as dual tamers were rare even among experienced tamers, and would definitely get attention. Leora began preparing, waiting for the next round of attacks from the wall to stop for a moment during shift change. This would give her clear targeting and maximum visibility for her demonstration. While accumulating power, her evolved demonic bastion will O-Wisp, now silver rank, began generating an enormous ball of spiritual fire. Individually, her beasts weren't enormous in power yet, but their synergies were remarkable when combined properly. And augmented by elemental control from both Larissa and Luna, they began generating an attack that reached power levels very few people in the kingdom were capable of achieving. Even working in coordination, the timing was perfect. Just as the attack from the wall opening stopped to change attackers, Leora released her massive fireball. The enormous ball of spiritual fire traveled directly toward the beast in a trajectory that could be clearly seen by everyone present. Both the old group of soldiers and the new group rotating into attack positions looked up toward where projectile had originated. In addition to active combatants, all soldiers positioned on top of the wall, several messengers moving between positions, and other support personnel turned their attention toward the spectacular display. The explosion when the fireball impacted was devastating. Dozens of mutants were instantly vaporized by the direct hit, but what was most impressive was what happened next. The fire expanded rapidly and seemed extraordinarily difficult to extinguish, igniting new creatures that continued arriving at an alarming rate. In seconds, hundreds of additional mutants were burning, creating a chain reaction that eliminated more enemies in a single attack than most teams managed in dozens of shots. Hundreds of soldiers remained in complete awe at such elimination efficiency with only one strike. "Who the hell did that?" Someone was heard shouting from below. Came from up there. "Those are just kids." But the results had spoken for themselves. The impact crater and continuing fire had created a significant gap in the enemy line that would take time for creatures to fill. Luna felt satisfaction, but also nervousness. They had achieved their goal of getting attention, but now came the more difficult part, actually dealing with the political complications that would follow. In the distance, she could see Lady Morgaine and Lord Aldrich clearly observing them, probably trying to determine exactly who they were and what they were doing in their sector without permission. "Here they come," Larissa murmured, watching as several figures began advancing toward their position. Luna straightened, touching the official document hidden in her clothing. It was time for the real test of her plan. In moments, they would be face to face with experienced nobles who had every reason to resent teenage princesses interfering with operations that had been running smoothly. The political battle that followed could determine not only whether they could maintain a position here, but also whether their entire plan to keep her family honor would have any chance of success. And judging by the expressions on Morgan's and Aldrich's faces as they approached, they weren't going to make things easy. On Yino's side, where Victor commanded the defenses, things were also becoming difficult. Victor had been fighting against another corrupted artifact, another creature with a giant claw similar to the one Ren had faced. His enormous earth powers, amplified by his gold 3 Qilin, had fortunately been sufficient to keep the situation under control until now. With help from his specialized attack groups, he had managed to systematically destroy the creature that served as host for the artifact. His earth attacks could pulverize the organic abomination, almost completely separating the artifact from its biological carrier. But just as it seemed he had the situation controlled, he felt another energy signature rapidly approaching. Another artifact. Chapter 592, Taming the Swarm, 7. For Victor, it was exactly the same situation that Selphra's side was now facing. Multiple artifacts converging on the same location, creating a more complex crisis that challenged every strategic assumption they had made against the small mutants. When the second artifact arrived, mounted on the back of another giant mutant, Victor realized he would need to use all his available power. He fused completely with his Qilin, but didn't stop there. He activated the fusion he rarely used. His wing Qilin, an evolution that combined massive terrestrial power with aerial mobility. If he used it quickly for less than a minute, it wouldn't exact too much of a toll for his total exhaustion. With a roar that made the earth tremble for kilometers around, Victor eliminated both artifact-connected creatures with his cataclysmic elemental power, completely crushing them with a huge mineral attack that reduced them to what could be called basic components. For a moment, it seemed he had achieved a decisive victory. But again, the artifacts received no damage whatsoever. And when the two giant arms found themselves close to each other, without the creatures that had been carrying them, something unexpected began happening. They resonated. The small creatures that constantly arrived began going mad, moving faster and swirling around the abandoned artifacts. No matter how much Victor and his troops attacked them, they couldn't finish them all. There were too many, arriving too fast. In the end, an enormous mass of lesser mutants fused into a single entity, absorbing both artifacts. This time it wasn't two separate giant creatures. It was just one, but specifically adapted to handle both arms together. The new abomination was larger, stronger, and its eyes blazed with intelligence the previous versions hadn't shown. This new corruption was learning, adapting, becoming more than the sum of its parts. Victor found himself facing something that seemed impossible to beat, and in the distance, he could feel more big-energy signatures approaching, suggesting the convergence pattern wasn't limited to these two artifacts. The idea was alarming. The artifacts weren't just activating randomly. They were being drawn together by some type of signal or mutual attraction. If that trend continued, they would soon be facing powers that exceeded anything the kingdom was prepared to combat. Original content can be found at novifire.net. The northern sector on Yano's side carried cold air thanks to the enormous ice wall. This air smelled of sweat, fresh water, and the tension that always accompanied force alliances. Luna observed how Morgan's and Aldrich Galeheart soldiers had positioned their formations in the center, relegating the few local Starweaver troops to the flanks as if they were second-category reinforcements. The arrangement was deliberate, a visual demonstration of who held real power regardless of whose territory they were defending. "How shameless," Mayo murmured. Her eyes narrowed with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to detecting subtle insults. They're not even trying to hide that they see them as invaders in their own territory. Larissa felt her stomach contract. She had spent months taking refuge in the castle security, where her only battles were against her own memories. Now she was forcing herself to support her best friends, but still felt a mix of nausea and determination. The reality was that she wasn't feeling ready to be out, but she would have to endure it. The protocols for leadership changed state. Larissa began with a wavering voice, then stopped and breathed deeply. "No, the protocol is garbage when you have the correct documentation." Her voice became firmer. "Luna, you have the legal right to assume territorial command in the absence of direct family leadership in your own territory. In theory, you're next in line if your uncles aren't here. And with the current crisis, any noble present in Starweaver territory must submit to local authority." Luna nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she touched the sealed documents she carried hidden. "And if they simply ignore me? Then—" Leora intervened with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll have to remind them with a little more fire who has the power." Finally, the two groups were a few meters apart on top of the wall. Morgan's guards escorted her with great calm and slowness, their armor clinking with each step calculated to sound more intimidating than necessary. The sound created an artificial atmosphere of military pageantry, designed to emphasize hierarchy and experience. Luna kept her chin high, but Larissa could see the tension in her shoulders. Lady Morgaine greeted them with a dismissive gesture. She was a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled gray hair and eyes that seemed to not really see. Instead, they gave all possible concentration to her ears that constantly evaluated the political benefits of each uttered word. Her smile was professional, calculated to appear warm without committing to anything. "Lady Luna," Morgaine said with a bow that was technically correct, but clearly condescending. "What a surprise to see you here. I thought your family was indisposed to participate in defending this territory. Do you have any reports for me? Or why are you here?" Lord Aldrich, who had been studying his own map of the zone, looked up with scarcely disguised annoyance. He was a man with angular features that had been attractive in his youth, but now seemed perpetually sour. "Morgaine," Aldrich murmured, "let's not waste time with empty courtesies. The girl is obviously here instead of in school, because someone likely put ideas in her head about defending her territory or some similar fantasy. She doesn't know she's breaking the law by coming to interfere with the defense." Luna felt the insult like a slap, but before she could respond, Larissa stepped forward. Her hands trembled for a moment, then stabilized while she unfolded some documents. "Lord Aldrich," Larissa said with soft but clear voice, "I'm afraid you're alleging under incorrect information." Each word came out more confident than the last, as if by playing politics. She was remembering muscles she had forgotten how to use. According to the revised territorial code, Section 12, Article 43, any direct heir of a territorial house has the right to assume defensive command in the absence of higher-ranking family authority, especially during national security crises. Morgaine frowned. "That's a very specific statute, Lady Larissa. Are you sure it applies to a girl so far from a mature age under these circumstances?" "Completely certain," Larissa responded. "Furthermore, Article 45 clarifies that nobles from non-local territories must coordinate with, not command over, legitimate territorial authority." She paused, then added with more force, "which means Lady Morgaine should be reporting to Luna, not the other way around." A small smile formed on Luna's face. "Do you have any reports?" she said, looking directly at Morgaine. The silence that followed was thick as molasses. Chapter 593, Taming the Swarm, 8. After the first round of greetings, the reversal was complete. The experienced noble who had been treating them as children was now faced with legal documentation that turned the tables entirely. Morgan's professional composure began showing cracks as she processed the implications of what had just happened. Around them, soldiers who had been observing the exchange began to realize they were witnessing something significant. The political dynamics of the entire defensive position had just shifted with a few pieces of paper. But Aldrich let out a dry, humorless laugh that carried the weight of decades spent dismissing challenges from those he considered beneath him. "Documents," he murmured with disdain that dripped like poison from every syllable. "And I suppose you have all the necessary seal documentation? Because the type of authorization you describe requires specific seals from the royal family." Larissa smiled for the first time in months. A small, nervous smile, but genuine. The first crack in the wall of grief she had built around herself. "Of course." Luna unfurled the documents with the royal seal clearly visible, the magical authentication glowing softly in the light. Everything perfectly legal and appropriately authorized. Morgaine approached to examine the papers, her eyes narrowing while she verified each line with the scrutiny of someone who had spent years navigating legal technicalities. Her expression gradually hardened as she realized the documents were indeed legitimate. "This is technically correct," she admitted reluctantly, each word seeming to cause her physical pain, "but highly irregular. The circumstances that permitted this authorization are irrelevant," Larissa interrupted, finding her voice growing more intense and full-bodied with each word. Years of legal education and political observation crystallized into confident authority. The documentation is valid. The territory is hers by right, and you are violating protocol by operating here without her permission. Aldrich straightened, his expression becoming dangerous in a way that some powerful people became when their authority was questioned by those they considered children. "Arrogant girls who don't know the real world," he said, his voice dropping to the tone reserved for threats. "Do you think some simple papers give you real authority? I have thousands of veteran soldiers here. Morgaine has more. You have, what? 3 maids and a handful of guards." The threat hung in the air like poisonous smoke, its implications clear to everyone present. Luna felt her control cracking, reality crushing her hopes like an avalanche of cynicism and raw power. It was then that Leora stepped forward, her expression changing from friendly concern to something much more dangerous, the controlled fury of someone who had watched friends suffer too long in silence. "Lord Aldrich," Leora said with a voice sweet enough to hide venom, "did you just threaten my friends?" Something in her tone made the guards present tense instinctively. Aldrich frowned, but his political arrogance overrode his survival instincts. So what, little princess? Are they going to run to their parents? The mockery was obvious, designed to remind them of their missing family. Leora smiled without humor, and for the first time since they had arrived at the wall, the temperature seemed to change. Princess, I am Leora Ashimway, and it turns out I have explicit permission from my grandmother Selphra to use whatever amount of power I want. Leora extended her right hand, and both her spirit and her bash materialized simultaneously at her sides. But she didn't stop there. The fusion was instantaneous and glorious, her beast combining into a creature of black flames that then duplicated and fused with her. No tamer present was capable of reaching a similar power level. Selphra's name combined with a new female dual tamer of this caliber openly showing her power carried serious implications for the girl's future. Morgaine visibly paled, recognizing the political earthquake that such backing represented, while Aldrich unconsciously took a step back. Selphra, Morgaine murmured, the name carrying weight that transcended simple familial connection. Selphra agrees with this? Oh, absolutely. Leora responded with false cheerfulness that made her words more threatening than any shouted challenge. In fact, she told me that if anyone tried to stop me, I should show them how outdated that archaic way of thinking had become. So, please, Leora said, her voice now loaded with authority borrowed from one of the kingdom's most powerful tamers, continue explaining to me why you think you can intimidate my friends. A sphere of black fire began forming over her extended palm, growing until it was more than a meter in diameter. The heat was so intense that the air itself began undulating as it continued expanding. Aldrich swallowed hard, but maintained his defiant posture despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Power isn't everything in politics, girl. You may have an impressive fusion, but you're not a Star Weaver. You can't legitimize a girl like Luna's claim with just false papers and threats. Morgaine nodded, though she maintained distance from the fire sphere that radiated heat like a miniature dark sun. Lord Aldrich is right. External support from a single individual, no matter how powerful, cannot replace the legitimacy of protocols. And with the Star Weaver patriarch indisposed, Luna's claim is, at best, problematic of the crown on the firstborn prince's head as well. Leora felt her rage intensify, like fuel added to flame. These nobles were still being completely rational in their power play, and that made them infinitely more detestable than if they had been simply cruel. You are absolutely despicable, she murmured, the fire sphere pulsing brighter with each word. Logical, calculating, and completely hateful. Without thinking, Leora directed her fire sphere like a destructive comet. The ball of flames tore through the air and impacted directly in the center of the horde of corrupt creatures approaching the wall. The resulting explosion, vaporizing a dozen mutants instantly and sending their corrupted remains scattering like ash in the wind. That's for interrupting my conversation, Leora shouted, though her voice carried more satisfaction than real annoyance. But even as the remains of her attack faded, Aldrich shook his head with the confidence of someone who had weathered many displays of power. Impressive power, he admitted nervously, but this proves exactly my point. You're not the one who should be directing the defense of Starweaver territory. We can take our armies and leave, the wall would fall instantly, and no matter how effective you are, you'd still be a soldier. You can't take an army alone. Leora wasn't a Starweaver, and although she supported her friend, it didn't help much when trying to get Luna to take the command role without soldiers. In a certain way, they were right, although Aldrich should still obey Luna's orders in theory. Which is why Leora got angry how low they were being by speaking while hiding details, and how obvious what they were doing was. But Luna touched her shoulder. Luna had felt something break inside her. Not her hope, but her fear. All her life she had been the Star Weaver who had to hide behind her father's protection, the one who always needed to avoid others taking advantage of her innate characteristics. But that would end now. Seeing Leora fight for her, seeing Larissa overcome her trauma to help her, she realized she had been thinking about everything completely wrong. She was important. She always had been. She already had enough power. She no longer had to hide behind someone else. Now, it wasn't about being good enough to help her cover the Starweaver name. It was about making the Starweaver name worthy of her. Luna stepped forward, passing beside Leora, and for the first time in her life, She didn't hesitate when calling her beast together. Her elemental devourer wolf materialized to her left, a massive creature of shadows that seemed to absorb light itself. Her light and wind tiger appeared to her right, its fur shining with energy that made the surrounding air vibrate. She had also shown her double status. Follow current novels on novelfire.net. The fusion that followed was different from anything Aldrich and Morgaine had seen before. Combining and duplicating the contrary attributes of light and shadow created something that transcended normal magical categories. Pure chaos, but given purpose and direction. The result was a presence that made both Morgaine and Aldrich step back again instinctively. And Luna wouldn't let her presence show just power, but also authority. "Lady Morgaine," Luna said, her voice now loaded with the weight of centuries of Starweaver lineage, "you have 30 seconds to begin withdraw your soldiers from my territory before I decide to compel you." "You can't," Aldrich began. "Lord Aldrich," Luna continued, ignoring him completely. "You can stay at my side and coordinate your forces with my orders, or you can leave and put them in my charge. But you will never command anything on Starweaver land above me again." The shadows around them began extending like hungry tentacles, responding to her emotional state with eager malevolence. But instead of attacking the nobles, Luna directed her power toward the corrupt creatures still approaching the wall. The frantic shadows shot out like living projectiles, absorbing the residual flames from Leora's attack and converting them into veils of destructive energy that multiplied exponentially under her control. The result was a temporary massacre that redefined the battlefield. Dozens of mutants were annihilated in seconds, their corrupt forms disintegrating under the combined assault of shadow and fire. Chapter 594, Taming the Swarm, 9. Aldrich was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled, as someone who had spent decades navigating political defeats. "Lady Luna, it seems I misunderstood the situation. Of course, I'll be delighted to coordinate under your territorial authority." Morgaine clenched her fists, the gesture visible despite her attempts to maintain diplomatic composure, but nodded stiffly. "My soldiers will withdraw from your territory immediately." The reversal was complete, but everyone present understood it was built on a foundation of force rather than genuine respect. "God," Luna murmured once they had moved away from the defeated nobles, "I hope I know what I'm doing, because now I'm officially known as a dual Tamer, without father's backing. If the other branch of my family decides to use this to their advantage." Larissa approached and placed a firm hand on Luna's shoulder, the gesture carrying weight beyond simple comfort. "Then we'll be there to face them too." Leora raised her hands dramatically. "Yeah, relax, and you know what? I think I like this new version of politics. It's much more direct than all that dance and courtesy garbage." Luna laughed, though the sound carried as much tension as relief. The reality of what she had just done was settling in like cold water. "Leora, you just turned diplomacy into a combat sport." "So? It worked, didn't it?" Larissa looked at her two friends and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Joy. Not just for Luna, but for herself. She had managed to face a complex political situation without falling apart, had used her knowledge to help a friend, and had emerged from the suffocating safety of the castle into a world where she could make a difference. But she was still afraid. She still sensed the weight of what she had lost. She still didn't know if she was ready to face him, and it was then that the ground shook. The tremor wasn't like the constant vibration of combat. This was different, deeper, carrying the promise of something big approaching. On the horizon, a massive silhouette became visible. Another corrupted artifact was approaching, and this time Luna had command. If she couldn't stop it, and the wall broke, the failure would be hers. "Well," Luna murmured, observing the threat approach with the weight of newfound responsibility settling on her shoulders, "I suppose now we'll see if I deserve this territory after all." The ice mountain wouldn't hold much longer. The second crack was barely audible above the constant roar of lesser mutants crashing against the wall's defenses. Rin felt a third crack before hearing it, a vibration that traveled through his elemental connections with earth and ice and something more. "They're sacrificing half their life energy into the artifacts to break free," he murmured, pointing toward the crystalline mountain containing the two giant abominations. From atop the wall, Julius watched the cracks spreading like spider webs across the frozen surface, each fracture glowing with internal corruption that pulsed like a heartbeat. What other method do we have to stop them? Zhao asked, his wings already deploying in preparation for combat that felt increasingly inevitable. Selphira, slightly exhausted from her previous effort, studied the situation with eyes that had seen too many battles to feel optimism about their current options. I can't make anything much more resistant with what I have left. I used 30% just in that attempt. The small, corrupt creatures that normally limited themselves to throwing their bodies against the wall's defenses now behaved differently. Instead of attacking randomly, they headed directly toward the ice prison, circling around it, their bodies occasionally crashing against the surface and scraping at the expanding cracks. Each impact released energy that fed the liberation process from within, a consistent weakening that showed coordination beyond simple animal instinct. A muffled roar emerged from inside the ice mountain, followed by another, louder crack. This time, everyone could see it clearly. A man-sized fissure opened in the prison's north flank, revealing the purplish glow pulsing within. But the soldiers were preparing something to greet them upon emerging. Increased fire cadence. Selphira shouted to soldiers positioned in the towers, "Don't allow more mutants to accumulate around the prison." The assault soldiers burst into activity, abandoning orderly shifts and gradually accumulating at the top to add to the offensive. Elemental attacks rained down on the creatures like deadly rain. For moments, the strategy seemed to work. Most lesser mutants were annihilated before approaching the mountain, their bodies vaporized by the concentrated elemental bombardment's intensity. But then Ren felt something that made his blood freeze. "They're arriving faster," he murmured, his connection to the earth revealing massive vibrations approaching from multiple directions. Much faster. As if they had heard an inaudible signal, massive waves of lesser mutants began emerging from underground tunnels that open around the prison. Not dozens, but hundreds of creatures running in suicidal formation toward the ice mountain. "They're sacrificing themselves," Julius observed, fascination and horror mixing in his voice. "This isn't random bestial behavior. There's an intelligence directing this." "We can't stop them all," shouted one of the captains. The soldiers fired nonstop, but for every mutant that fell, 3 more took its place. Selphira extended her arms, releasing another burst of frozen power that created a temporary barricade of ice crystals. Mutants that contacted the barrier were instantly impaled, but the pressure of numbers was overwhelming. "It's an impossible war of attrition," Zhao murmured, launching bursts of sharp feathers that pierced dozens of creatures. "And they have more numbers than we have firepower." Ren observed the battle's development with growing understanding, his mind working through possibilities as the situation deteriorated. "Grandmother Selphira," he shouted above the combat's roar, "can you freeze them again once they emerge?" "Yes, but only once more." The source of this content, S-Novi F. IR.net. "If we completely eliminate the organic matter surrounding them, maybe the artifacts won't be able to escape your ice prison again." Ren proposed, "But it would have to be everything at once. If any living tissue remains, they could regenerate or inject energy to break the freezing again. We should stop the attack and accumulate powerful synergies for. We increase fire cadence just as they're freed." Julius immediately understood the strategy. "I see. Concentrated bombardment at the moment of liberation, complete elimination of organic tissue, immediate freezing of naked artifacts." Zhao summarized. "Exactly." Ren nodded. "Without an energy source, maybe they'd be permanently trapped." It was a solid plan, but required perfect coordination and everyone maintaining their energy levels at the critical moment. With the attrition battle developing before them, there was no guarantee they'd have enough power when the moment arrived. Chapter 595, Taming the Swarm 10. A deafening roar emerged from the ice prison when another massive crack opened, this time revealing part of what appeared to be a gigantic arm moving slowly. "The first one is breaking free," a soldier shouted. There was no time to organize a concentrated attack. The soldiers focused their fire on the opening, trying to damage the creature before it could emerge completely. Flames and various projectiles crashed against the exposed surface, tear away pieces of corrupted flesh that kept regenerating. It wasn't enough. The ice prison disintegrated with a final crack, freeing the 2 massive creatures that immediately began moving toward each other with disturbing purpose. They were quite damaged by Selfer's freezing attack, and many of their parts also seemed to have dried up, perhaps from injecting their vital energy into the artifacts to escape. But for the creatures, the damage wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. "They're fusing," Zhao shouted. The two abominations, each the size of a 4-story building, extended grotesque appendages that intertwined with wet, organic sounds. The artifacts on their backs resonated with corrupt energy, creating a discordant harmony. The fusion process was horrifying to witness, a twisted melding of corruption that defied every natural order they understood. But more soldiers joined the attack. The combined bombardment from the soldiers was devastating. Massive chunks of corrupted flesh tore away from the fused creature, exposing the artifact, spheres gleaming within its writhing mass. For one brilliant moment, it seemed their strategy might actually work. Yet hundreds of small mutants continued their suicidal charge, throwing themselves into the path of destruction. The fusion process continued developing in a way that was simultaneously fascinating and nauseating to witness. Corrupted flesh reorganized itself like living clay, flowing and merging with wet, organic sounds that made even veteran soldiers grimace. The mass threatened to never stop growing until the two creatures became a single, even more massive entity. "All fire on the fusion zone," Julius commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos of battle. "Now, while they're vulnerable, every tamer, every soldier, every beast concentrated their power on the transforming creature. The air filled with elemental energy so dense it was visible. Fire that turned sand into molten glass, wind that cut like razor blades, earth and wood that rose in lethal spikes. They were gaining ground. The beasts couldn't seem to resist the enormous magical onslaught from the ever-increasing number of soldiers crowding the wall's summit. Their organic bodies, no matter how numerous, weren't enough against such concentrated power. Selfer prepared herself to freeze the artifacts that would soon be separated and exposed. But just when victory seemed within reach in their war of attrition, Rin felt a familiar vibration that turned his stomach. "Another energy signature," he murmured, his eyes snapping toward the northern horizon. "Another big one." Julius followed his gaze and saw what he feared, a massive silhouette approaching from the direction where everything had begun. The fourth artifact from this side was heading directly toward them. As if waiting for the cruelest moment for a sick joke, fate delivered two messages to Julius simultaneously. The first concerned the northern section of their own wall, the handwriting being exactly identical to Larissa's already generated an enormous headache for him. But the second wasn't any better. The situation with Victor? The response came picturing the same battle intensity. Two fused artifacts, new creature, more intelligent than the previous ones. Two more approaching. They seem to be heading toward the castles, and they fuse when they get close to each other. "So, how many artifacts are there in total?" Zhao asked, his voice tight with growing dread. "It seems 4 on each side." Julius crushed the reports in his fist. 6 arms and 2 legs. "But we don't know if more could arrive." "Damn," Selfer muttered, dividing her attention between maintaining the bombardment and preparing for the new threat. 2 seemed manageable, but 4 on each side. A tense silence fell over the group as they processed the information. 8 artifacts total, possibly more. And all seemed to have the same tendency. Head toward population centers and fuse when they were close to each other. "Where's Sirius?" Ren murmured, the question escaping before he could stop it. He was supposed to take the central route to reach where that last artifact rests. Did something happen to him? For more chapters, visit novel f.ir.net. But there was no time to speculate. The third enemy for this zone arrived. Another arm, the fourth and perhaps final artifact from this side, impacted the battlefield, like a plot twist of the victory they'd been so close to achieving. It stopped right beside the entity that was still fusing. Not only did it serve as a shield, so the first two could merge completely without hesitation, it joined the process, its organic matter flowing toward the central mass like water finding its level. The energy released by the triple fusion created a shockwave that knocked several soldiers to their knees and cracked sections of the defensive wall. When the blinding light faded, what remained was something that defied all previous understanding of functional anatomy. The resulting creature was approximately shaped like a bizarre giant scorpion, but built with completely unbalanced proportions. Two massive arms serve as its primary pincers, each one the size of a siege tower. The leg, the third appendage at the rear, functioned as a tail stinger that curved high above its malformed body. All three artifacts were now completely integrated into its structure, positioned at the front to provide shields that made the creature virtually indestructible. "By all the dragons," Selfer whispered. The scorpion creature advanced toward the defensive wall, its multiple eyes blazing with intelligence none of the previous versions had shown. Each step made the earth tremble, sending vibrations through the stone that the defenders could feel in their bones. But it stopped abruptly halfway to the defensive wall. Its multiple eyes, which had been sweeping the battlefield in search of threats, suddenly focused on a specific point, the zone where Ren stood. Why did it stop? Julius muttered, unnerved by the abomination's direct stare. Ren felt a chill that had nothing to do with the icy wind blowing from the frozen structure that carried him. It was the same sensation he had experienced in the depths, as if something invisible had been watching him from the shadows, studying him, recognizing him. Chapter 596, Taming the Swarm 11. "It's looking at us," Zhao murmured, his wings deploying instinctively. "No, wait. It's looking at you, Ron." It was true. The dozens of eyes covering the scorpion creature were fixed on Ron with sickening intensity. There was recognition in that gaze, a familiarity that shouldn't exist between a human and a corrupted abomination. "What does it want?" Julius asked, but his voice sounded distant, as if he were asking his own memories rather than expecting an answer. When the creature was about 50 meters from the wall's base, it stopped again. Its pincers rose toward the sky, its segments tensed, every piece of corrupted flesh straining against itself. And then it opened what might have been its mouth. The shriek that followed wasn't simply sound. It was the same type of sonic attack that Ren had experienced underground, and again not long ago with Julius, but amplified until it became something far more potent. Ren doubled over, his hands flying instinctively to his ears, as the world filled with pain that couldn't be located in any specific part of his body. It was as if every cell was vibrating at a discordant frequency. The latest __Sodies are on _the Velfire.net. "Run!" Julius's voice came like a distant echo, barely audible above the roar that filled his head. But this time, his body's reaction was different. The last time he had faced this type of attack, the seed in his chest had been easy to control, providing him with strength in measured doses. Now, the response was explosive. The seed wasn't completely purified, and it didn't limit itself to receiving the sonic attack. It absorbed it, processed it, and transformed it into chaotic energy that shot through his system like liquid electricity. Ren felt the exact moment when he lost control of it. The roots he had kept carefully contained in his chest extended suddenly, but not with a gradual, controlled expansion he thought he had learned to manage. They burst outward like a dam breaking, spreading through his body with violent urgency. Black lines sprouted beneath his skin, branching like an alternative circulatory system that extended from his heart toward every extremity. The patterns were intricate, almost artistic in their complexity, but completely alien to any normal human anatomy. The roots branched through his arms, creating designs that seemed to combine arcane runes with organic growth patterns. "What's happening to him?" Zhao shouted, but there was no answer. Nobody had seen anything similar to what was happening with Run. The pain from the shriek faded abruptly, replaced by something completely different. Ren could feel everything, every vibration in the earth, every fluctuation of mana in the air. But more disturbing still, he could feel the scorpion creature, not as an external entity, but as something familiar, something that resonated with the energy now coursing through the roots in his body. It was like looking into a dark mirror and recognizing features he didn't want to acknowledge. When he finally raised his head to look at the abomination, his eyes blazed with the same purple light he had seen in the corrupted systems of the artifacts. The same light that now pulsed through the black veins spreading across his skin, like living tattoos of power and corruption intertwined. In the northern sector of the wall, the situation had ended completely differently. Luna, Leora, and Larissa held their positions atop the wall, while observing how the combined forces under Luna's new command executed a strategy that had proven surprisingly effective. Unlike the massive bombardment approach used on the main front, Here they had developed something more elegant, something that showed how their individual strengths work in perfect harmony. Leora and Luna had activated their complete fusions, their combined beasts creating synergies that exponentially amplified the power of the spiritual black fire. The flames fed not only on their own energy, but drew strength from the common fire of allied soldiers below. The sight was mesmerizing. Dark flames danced with ordinary fire, each type of energy making the other stronger. Larissa had chosen not to fuse, maintaining her support based entirely on her fairy's elemental control. Her role was subtler, using her evolved link stealthy only to direct wind currents when needed, and really nothing more was necessary. Hadron thought of the girls' synergies as more than individual when he'd helped them develop their techniques, because what they achieved together transcended anything they could accomplish alone. The four beasts worked in perfect synchrony. Leora's fusion of her demonic bash and wisp generated the spiritual black fire, while Luna's fusion of her elemental devourer wolf and light and wind tiger created shadow soldiers that concentrated and directed the flames with intelligence. Each shadow moved following Luna's purpose, positioning themselves to maximize the fire's impact, creating channels that funneled the spiritual flames toward the most vulnerable points of their massive enemy. Now! Larissa shouted, directing the final wind current that channeled Leora's black fireball directly toward the exposed core within the giant creature. The resulting explosion was spectacular. Black fire vaporized corrupted flesh like paper in a furnace. The creature's roar cut off mid-scream as spiritual flames burrowed deep into its organic structure, consuming it from within. Soldiers from both factions erupted in cheers. Even Aldrich's troops couldn't help but be impressed by the effectiveness of the combined attack. "Excellent work, Lady Luna!" shouted one of the local Starweaver captains, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "The creature is falling." Lord Aldrich maintained his neutral expression, but Larissa could see the frustration in his eyes as he forced himself to appear pleased with Luna's success. "Send a message," Leora murmured to Larissa, already thinking ahead to the political implications. "We need official record of this achievement for political effects." Larissa nodded, already scribbling on a parchment that would be sent by Messenger Eagle. The victory wasn't just military, but political. Each success under Luna's command strengthened her territorial claim, making it harder for her uncles to dismiss her, but their celebration was premature. While they watched the giant creature collapse in a heap of smoldering flesh and bone, the hordes of lesser mutants that had been attacking in scattered formations suddenly changed behavior. Instead of continuing their random assaults against the wall, they began converging specifically toward the charred remains of the fallen abomination. "What are they doing?" Leora murmured, watching as hundreds of small creatures swarmed around the exposed artifact. The answer came when the first lesser creatures threw themselves directly into black fire that still burned. Instead of being consumed by the flames, something else happened. Each mutant that sacrificed itself extinguished more of the flames. Slowly, horribly, the giant arm began to regenerate, but it didn't regenerate in the same place. "It's moving," Luna shouted, pointing toward where the artifact's partially reconstructed carrier began sinking into the earth like a massive, corrupted mole. Larissa immediately extended her earth control, trying to track the underground movement. Her beast provided her with sufficient power to sense vibrations through the ground, but what she found alarmed her more than the creature's regeneration. The artifact wasn't just fleeing, it was moving with purpose. "It's heading south," she murmured, her voice tight with growing dread. Chapter 597, Taming the Swarm, 12. Can we pursue it? Leora asked, already preparing to jump in for subterranean combat, spiritual flames dancing around her fingers. Larissa shook her head grimly. "It would be a huge disadvantage for you two to fight down there, but the wall's underground defenses extend for kilometers. It should be very difficult for it to enter the city advancing underground, especially when our best Earth Tamers have been containing creatures in that direction for days." The underground defensive network was strong, an already established system, a maze of reinforced tunnels and Earth-based high-ranked Tamers. If the artifact tried to tunnel toward the city center, it should trigger dozens of warning systems and give lots of time for a counterattack. Or it should, all in all, it was better than the wall impromptu ice defense. So they should keep defending this weaker point to ensure Luna's rewards. Then we should send some Earth soldiers to track it, Luna decided, her voice carrying the authority she fought so hard to establish. At least make sure it doesn't try to jump the wall at a different point. It was a logical but limited decision. They could follow the artifact, but they didn't have the necessary specialty to stop it underground. Their only hope was that the wall's subterranean defenses would be sufficient to keep it away from the city. Their job was to secure the defense here for Luna's political standing. Moments later, everything had stabilized. The smoke from the last Blackfire attack slowly dissipated over the battlefield, carrying with it the acrid smell of corrupted flesh. Larissa observed from atop the wall how soldiers reorganized their formations, how all the chaos of the last few minutes gradually transformed into the disciplined order of a continuous and successful defense. Luna had defused, her breathing still accelerated but stable. Her fusion had lasted barely less than 5 minutes of the 15 she could maintain. The intensity of combat had been sufficient to exhaust her considerably, but she remained conscious and alert, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for new threats. Leora was in slightly better condition, also defused. She flexed her fingers to relieve the residual tension from channeling so much spiritual fire. Her fusion had also been brief but effective, and though fatigue was noticeable in her movements, she remained completely functional. "We did it," Luna murmured, a small but genuine smile appearing on her face. "We really did it." "Of course we did it," Leora responded with confidence that couldn't completely disguise her own amazement, though I admit I didn't expect it to be so intense. Larissa watched them exchange these words of mutual satisfaction, feeling complex emotions that surprised her with their intensity. There was pride, certainly. She had participated in this, had contributed significantly to the success. But there was also something deeper, something that had been growing in her chest during the last few minutes, while watching her friends work together with a mutual confidence she had lost. For the first time in years, she had been outside the castle facing a real situation. It hadn't been a theoretical exercise or a simulation. It had been a genuine crisis where decisions had life-or-death consequences, where failure meant the death of innocent civilians. And it had worked. Her hands had been steady while directing the winds. Her mind had been clear while calculating trajectories and coordinating attacks. For a few precious minutes, she had been the person she used to be before everything fell apart. "What am I doing?" she asked herself, feeling tears beginning to accumulate in the corners of her eyes. "If I can do this, if I can be here and be useful for my city, why do I keep hiding?" The answer came immediately, as it always did, because she was afraid. Afraid of facing what she had lost, afraid of discovering that the damage was irreparable. But she had to realize someday, regardless of the outcome, she wasn't just a girl. She was the principal princess of Yano, an important figure who could do transcendental things. If she didn't take advantage of the inspiration from a victory like this now, when would she? The tears threatened to overflow when the memories came like an avalanche. Rin crying while she begged him not to take away the fragment. Rin with that expression of absolute resolve that had been more painful than any deliberate cruelty. The understanding that he had chosen to save everyone above her tears and pain. She forced herself to dry her eyes with the back of her hand. It was now or never. "Matilda," she approached timidly to where the most discreet maid was standing. How is Run? Do you know anything about him?" The question had been murmured in a low voice, but her tone had been higher pitched than expected. In the relative silence that had followed the end of the main combat, it was perfectly audible to all the nearby girls. Mayo turned so quickly she almost hit them. Her gasp was so loud and surprised it sounded like she had seen a ghost. "What?" Leora and Luna looked up from the battlefield immediately, directing all their attention toward where Mayo was staring at Larissa with enormous eyes. Mayo quickly approached Leora and whispered something in her ear. Larissa couldn't hear the specific words, but she saw how Leora's expression changed from confusion to understanding, and then to something that seemed like genuine delight. "Larissa," Leora said softly, with a smile that was completely different from her usual mischievous expression. This one was warm, hopeful. "I'm so glad to see you capable of asking that question." Larissa immediately brought her hands to her head, covering her face with her palms, while deeply regretting having opened her mouth. I shouldn't have. Forget I said anything. Updates are released by novelfire.net. Where is he? Maria asked directly, cutting through Larissa's discomfort and pushing her to listen to the answer, perhaps hopeful and ready to leave the castle and return to school with everyone too. Is he at the academy? The girls exchanged uncertain glances. It was a valid question, and none had a definitive answer. Probably yes, Matilda replied after a moment. Students should be in normal classes. The crisis doesn't directly affect the academy, so... Although, Leora added with a smile that suggested she knew the subject of their conversation all too well. Knowing Run, he's probably mixed up in all this somehow, too. Everyone laughed, a light laughter that relieved some tension. But Larissa noticed that Kira's laughter was different, more nervous, more forced than the others. Something was wrong. Kira, Leora asked, her instinct for detecting social anomalies activating immediately. Everything all right? Of course, Kira responded quickly, pointing toward the lines of mutants still advancing in the distance, though in much smaller numbers after the successful attacks. I'm just worried about the mutants that keep coming. We should stop the gossip and keep our guard up. Leora didn't look away from Kira. Instead, she casually extended a hand toward the battlefield. She fused for an instant, and without even looking where she was aiming, materialized a ball of spiritual black fire and launched it with precision toward the frontmost group of approaching mutants. The explosion eliminated the complete front section of creatures at once, and the fire expanded like a hungry living thing. That's going to help the soldiers siege, and fed by common, fire is going to last a while, Leora said without taking her eyes off Kira. So, talk. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Kira looked in every direction except toward Leora, clearly searching for an escape that didn't exist. Her hands fidgeted with the fabric of her uniform, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. I don't know what you're talking about. Kira, Mana doesn't lie. Luna's voice now carried the tone of authority she developed during her confrontation with the nobles. As your lady, I order you to answer. What do you know about Ron? Kira collapsed slightly, defeated by the combination of direct authority and the group's social pressure. Her shoulders sagged as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally become too heavy to bear. Mako and Shizu, she finally murmured, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of continuing battle. Yesterday, they told me they wouldn't be near the group for a while. They said they had a special mission. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Larissa felt her heart begin to race, a mixture of hope and terror flooding through her system. What kind of mission? Leora pressed, her voice sharp with growing concern. Kira's face crumpled as if she were about to cry. The words came out in a rush, as if she couldn't bear to hold them any longer. To stop Run, she admitted with a small voice. Apparently he had escaped from the academy. Silence, not even the distant sounds of battle, could penetrate the bubble of shock that surrounded the group. Larissa felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Ren had escaped? From the academy? That meant he was out here. Somewhere in this chaos, in this war zone filled with corrupted creatures and deadly artifacts.
Chapter 598, Taming the Swarm, 13. The silence continued until, when Luna asked, her voice now tense with concern that all might have something to do with what she had done in their last encounter. A little before we escaped, too, Kira responded deflatingly, like she had been holding on to uncomfortable information for too long. Of course he did, Mayo murmured, but her tone held more exasperated affection than real criticism. He's so predictable when it comes to getting involved in problems that aren't his. Maybe puberty problems, too? Leora asked after a moment, remembering something with a smile and clearly trying to lighten the mood with humor. You know how boys are at this age. Impulsive, emotional, doing stupid things to impress us girls. Puberty? Larissa asked, genuinely confused. What do you know about puberty when you're barely going through it yourself? You talk about it like you know so much, and what does that have to do with any of this? Mayo laughed, a laugh that contained too much malicious amusement to be coming from a girl. Oh, Leora thinks she's very grown up because she was very daring during her date with Run, Mayo said, clearly enjoying the opportunity to share privileged information. Mayo, Leora exclaimed, her cheeks instantly flushing red. "We said you weren't going to talk about that." Mayo shrugged with an impish smile. "If you already knew me, you shouldn't have told that secret to me specifically. I'm terrible at keeping juicy secrets like that one." "What secret?" Larissa pressed, feeling tons of curiosity and something deeper she didn't want to identify. Mayo approached Larissa and whispered something in her ear. Larissa listened, her eyes progressively widening, and then, "A kiss on the cheek." She shouted the question with enough volume that several nearby soldiers turned their heads toward them, then contained their laughter. The terrifyingly powerful leaders are still just girls, their shrugged shoulders seemed to say. Luna startled slightly, her eyes moving quickly between Leora and Larissa with an expression that was difficult to read. Leora and Larissa watched her attentively, expecting a more dramatic reaction. Jealousy, perhaps. Anger. Surprise. But Luna simply blushed slightly and looked away. "I expected more impact from you especially," Leora murmured, studying Luna's mana pattern with all the power of her advanced mana sight. "Or maybe jealousy, but I almost can't sense any jealousy in your mana." She paused, frowning as she analyzed more deeply, her enhanced perception reading the subtle fluctuations in Luna's energy field. "It feels more like shame." She focused more intently on Luna, with eyes bright with piqued curiosity. "Luna Starweaver, what exactly did you do on your date after mine?" "You both already had dates," Larissa asked, now completely lost. "What dates?" "Oh, they both had something like dates with Run," Mayo explained cheerfully, clearly enjoying being the center of dramatic attention. "Very romantic, very secret, very teenage." Larissa felt as if the ground had shifted even more strongly beneath her feet. Dates? Ren had been going on dates? But Leora had already returned her attention to Luna like a bloodhound following a scent. "Don't change the subject, Luna. Answer. Did you do something that surpassed my kiss on the cheek?" "No," Luna responded too quickly, too loudly. "I didn't do anything. We just talked." Luna's mana pattern clearly contradicted her words. "Lie," Leora said, surprised and almost unable to believe it. "Your mana says that's a full lie." "What did you do?" Mayo pressed, now completely invested in the drama. "Nothing," Luna insisted, but her blush had intensified until it completely covered her face and neck. It was then that Larissa began to cry. The tears came suddenly, without warning, spilling down her cheeks as she watched her friends exchange gossip about kisses, dates, and romantic moments with. But her mana pattern didn't show sadness. What really emanated from Larissa? Anger. And something sharper, more personal. Envy? "Larissa," Leora began softly, but Larissa turned away, wiping away tears with abrupt movements. "I'm fine," she murmured. But she had felt her own mana. She knew exactly what she wasn't saying. Luna spoke quickly and nervously. "Larissa, what happened between us and Run? Doesn't mean—" "No." Larissa turned toward her before her mana could reveal more, her eyes still wet, but her voice firm. "You don't have to explain anything to me. You have the right to whatever you did. I just hate me for being a coward. I was the one who wasted time to live free, and NW novel chapters are published on novelfire.net. She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. She had been the one who chose to hide. The one who chose to avoid difficult conversations. The one who had allowed fear to keep her away while life continued around her and moved ahead without her. And now, she was realizing exactly what it meant to be hidden. And she had to know once and for all the truth about what she felt more. Hatred? Or perhaps, "I want to see him," she finally murmured, so quietly it was barely audible. "When this is over, I want to talk to him." Leora smiled, though there was sadness mixed with pride in her expression as she realized she was no longer as far ahead as she believed. But an explorer spy wouldn't be intimidated by so little. "Of course," she said softly, "and he'll want to talk to you too. I'm sure of that." Luna, for her part, touched her lips and felt regret. She wondered silently if she had been fair to him and to her two most important allies. In the distance, another wave of mutants was approaching, and the work of defending was far from over. But now Larissa felt ready to face whatever came next. A while later, when everyone pretended nothing had happened so they could function and the soldiers wouldn't look at them with impertinent smiles, an eagle descended toward them with a response message to their previous achievement report. Larissa unrolled it quickly and read, her fingers trembling and her face paling with each line. "What does it say?" Luna asked. "Julius is with Selphra and Run. Confirms the registration of our success," Larissa replied slowly, processing the implications with growing dread. "But he also says that if possible, we should give everything and not let any artifact escape from our control, because it will try to join other similar ones that are also attacking." The message had arrived too late. The artifact was already beyond their reach, heading inexorably toward where the main battle was developing. "Damn," Luna murmured, watching the direction of the latest seismic waves that marked the artifact's passage towards Selphra's territory. But there was something else in the message that made Larissa's heart race. Julius was with Ren, but it also meant he was in the thick of the most dangerous battle, facing multiple artifacts simultaneously. Larissa furiously scribbled another message, this time an urgent warning about the artifact heading toward another position. Her handwriting was rushed, desperate, but her mind was clearer than it had been in months. She had a purpose now, beyond just proving Luna's leadership, and this message had to arrive fast.
Chapter 599, Taming the Swarm, 14. The roots pulsed beneath Ren's skin with a rhythm that didn't match his heartbeat. It felt like the life of something separate, an ancient being yet still strangely familiar. Ren felt as if he were synchronized with the very heartbeat of the earth itself. He had lost total control of his energy fluctuations, and his emotions were so fierce that he had entered a strange emotional shock. He couldn't feel them the right way. They were just energy now. Pure, raw, overwhelming energy that threatened to consume his very sense of self. The seed in his chest had broken even further. The crack that had formed during his confrontation with corruption was no longer a single fracture line. It was now a perfect X, identical to the way the world itself might have been divided by ancestral forces. "I understand now," he murmured, finally comprehending the true nature of what he carried within himself. While looking at the scorpion creature that observed him with that disturbing familiarity, he began to understand that what he was experiencing wasn't simply a reaction to corruption. It was a mutual connection with a being of similar energy trying to integrate him into its network. The energy he had absorbed that day hadn't been one force, but two cross pulses, separated by nature as far as possible from each other, but touching at 2 points on his seed. The pure energy fired by Targaryen, mixed and fused during the moment of the king's sacrifice, and the explosion that had crystallized thousands of corrupted creatures, had created something in Ren's seed. Something hybrid like these creatures. It was no longer purity against corruption. It was something completely different, something unprecedented. And through the new connections that had formed in his system, Ren could feel the energetic network that connected not just this creature, but all the abominations that had appeared during the crisis. It was like an invisible spider web extending across a space as vast as his fungal network and the corruption, pulsing with information that flowed from one node to another. The creatures they were facing weren't simply corrupted. They were a new evolution, something that hadn't been planned in the original development of either of the two opposing forces. Life had found a way, creating something unexpected at the intersection of conflict. Through the energetic network, Ren could sense the abomination's true intention. It wasn't the city they sought. They were searching for something specific that would allow them to complete their transformation, the artifact's full fusion. 10, he murmured, information flowing through the network like water through channels in his mind. There are 10 in total. 8 were active on the battlefield, heading toward convergence points at the castles where they could also fuse together. But the center of the cities was where 2 more were hidden, the last ones, buried deeply beneath structures that were recognized with a chill of understanding. The castles. Under the main castle where Larissa and the princes lived, and under the second castle of Yaino, where Targaryen statue now rested, lay the 2 remaining artifacts, and all of them, all 10, were prepared to become a single entity, the Crystal Tower again. "Of course," Ren whispered, the puzzle pieces fitting together in his mind with crystalline clarity. "It's always been about the tower. But there was a problem the creatures seemed not to understand. The tower was sealed, protected by barriers that required something specific to be breached. The 7 elemental rings from each side of the kingdoms, 14 in total, necessary to unlock the secrets that lay at the heart of the ancient structure. It was impressive that the artifacts could even detect the tower's presence through all the pure energy barriers that guarded it. But perhaps that same capacity was a disadvantage. Their hybrid nature allowed them now to perceive the pure energy that ancient corruption couldn't, but it also compelled them to seek something that remained beyond their reach. Unless they had another way, Rin frowned, exploring more deeply into the energetic network. He found no evidence of any alternative plan. The beasts and artifacts in the network seemed to be guided by instinct, not conscious strategy, which meant they would head there regardless of whether they could access it or not. And that would take them directly through the 2 cities populated by defenseless civilians. Perhaps upon realizing this, they would generate even more chaos. Seeing that Rin wasn't reacting positively to the hybrid network and wasn't releasing information or helping to reach the objective, the pseudo-scorpions shrieked louder. Despite the attacks from the Tamers around them, they still couldn't stop it at all. The black marks under Ren's skin began pulsing more intensely. His mind seemed close to being breached, but he could feel the power accumulating in his seed, waiting for direction, a decision on how to use it before its container shattered completely. Yet he could still resist it. He still had options. He could try to communicate with the creatures, use the connection he had established, and allow them to access the information in his head, so they would understand that the tower was sealed, that their search was futile. Maybe he could find a way to redirect their instincts towards something less destructive, but was it safe to let them access his internal network? The thought of opening his mind completely to these hybrid entities made his stomach churn. What if they didn't just take the information about the tower? What if they absorbed everything? His memories, his relationships, his very identity? Or he could use this accumulated power to try to fight, to attempt to destroy them. The hybrid energy flowing through his roots was of a different magnitude than anything he had experienced before. It felt like holding lightning in his bare hands, like channeling the fury of the storm through his fragile human form. But would his body withstand it? Would he have enough time? He wasn't just facing this creature. Through the network, he could sense how the 8 active artifacts were beginning to converge. Here in the south of the wall, the 3-part scorpion creature waited for the arrival of the 4th artifact from the northern sector. In the east, Victor was desperately fighting an abomination that had fused 2 artifacts and was seeking to unite with 2 others. The power signatures were overwhelming. Each fusion made the entities exponentially stronger, and if all 10 artifacts came together, the resulting creature would be beyond anything the kingdom had ever faced. Time to decide was running out. The scorpion creature's multiple eyes fixed on him with increasing intensity, and Ren could feel the network pressing against his consciousness like a tide trying to sweep him away. His friends, his family, the entire kingdom, everything depended on the choice he made in the next few moments. And he still didn't know which path would lead to salvation rather than destruction. Chapter 600, Taming the Swarm, 15 Descent. Run. Julius's voice reached him as if coming from very far away, though he stood only a few meters distant. What's happening? Rin turned slowly to look at his allies. Julius, Selphira, Zhao, all of them watched it with expressions of concern and fascination at the same time. The artifacts, Rin said, his voice strangely distant, as if he were speaking through an echo. They all seek to reach the castles. How do you know that? Selphira asked, her eyes studying the pattern spreading across his skin. Because I'm connected to them, Rin replied simply. And they're connected to me. Selphira and Julius exchanged a look loaded with meaning. Are you still you? Julius asked directly. Rin considered the question carefully. The roots pulsed more strongly, and he felt that the moment of decision was now. The hybrid power that had been accumulating in his system had reached a critical point. Every cell in his body thrummed with energy that demanded release. Through the network, he could sense how the scorpion creature was growing desperate, preparing to resume its relentless march toward the objective with or without him. The 4th artifact was close. Once that fusion was completed, they would have 4 artifacts united in a single entity, and then they would head toward the castles, toward the people. I have to go, Ren murmured, taking a step toward the wall's edge. "Run!" Julius shouted, reaching out toward him. "You can't face that alone." "Wait!" Selfra added, but Ren barely heard them. The roots beneath his skin pulsed with energy that made his entire body glow with purple light. The patterns extended to his eyes, transforming his vision into something that could perceive the flow of energy itself. Every cell of his body vibrated with hybrid power that demanded liberation, that roared to be used. Get full chapters from NoFire.net. Those who had shouted, and those who had realized what was happening, Zhao, Selfra, and Julius, were about to grab him, but he channeled part of the accumulated energy toward his legs, combining wind and the new hybrid force in a single explosion of propulsion. The impact pushed back the three powerful adults and completely destroyed the summit of the ice wall where he had been standing, sending crystalline fragments in all directions. The frozen platform, which had withstood the weight of hundreds of people and the siege of enormous creatures, simply disintegrated under the force of Ren's launch. Selfra had to create a shield with the same ice in an emergency maneuver to protect the group from fragments of her own creation. Ren had shot through the air like a purple projectile, his trajectory perfectly calculated to impact directly against the scorpion creature's center of mass. Elements swirled around him as he flew. Wind that increased his speed, wood and rock that hardened his body like living armor, fire that supported the wind's propulsion. The impact was catastrophic. Ren struck the creature with the force of a meteor, drilling directly through its exoskeleton and creating an explosion of elemental energy. The abomination, which literally weighed hundreds of times more than him, staggered backward while roaring in pain and surprise. But Ren didn't stop there. Using the creature's moment of disorientation, he channeled his earth control to create a series of enormous holes beneath the abomination's hind legs. The ground opened while explosions of wind and fire attacked its joints. The scorpion creature collapsed to one side. Ren took immediate advantage. As he ran along the beast's body, his hands glowed with elemental combinations he had never attempted before. Fire, light, and minerals fused into superheated plasma that cut through corrupted flesh like butter. Wood, darkness, and water combined into black sludge that devoured exposed flesh. Bolt after bolt of pure energy pierced the exoskeleton, creating wounds that smoked and bled. But the artifacts themselves remained intact, pulsing with their own energy while the surrounding flesh slowly regenerated. Ren dodged a claw that passed centimeters from his head. "The artifacts are still invulnerable," he murmured in that strange, cold voice. The creature managed to get back on its feet, quickly adapting to Ren's tactics. Its movements became more defensive, protecting the areas where the artifacts were connected, while using them to create barriers against elemental attacks. But Ren had found his rhythm. The hybrid power coursing through his veins didn't just give him strength. It gave him understanding. He could see the creature's regeneration patterns, predict where new tissues would form, anticipate weak points before the creature itself knew them. He moved like never before. It wasn't just speed, it was perfect fluidity. Each step, each leap, each attack flowed into the next in a dance of destruction that was both beautiful and terrible. His attacks became more sophisticated, combinations of four simultaneous elements that created entirely new effects. The creature roared in frustration as each regeneration was immediately followed by a new attack that caused even more damage. But Ren was losing energy fast. And then, as if the roar had been a signal, the small mutant creatures that had been advancing toward the wall went mad. Hundreds of them swarmed around the battle, forming concentric circles. And then the scorpion creature opened all its mouths at once and released another shriek that wasn't just sound. The shriek hit Ren with force, but this time it managed to affect him. During the last few minutes of intense combat, he had been constantly discharging the hybrid energy, bringing the internal sensations down to a point where he could perceive them again. They were terrifyingly intense. And now, with his system less overloaded, he could feel every nuance of the sonic attack. It was overwhelming. The pain wasn't just physical. It was as if every fiber of his being was being unraveled and reassembled. His connections to the elements wavered. His control over the roots faltered. His perfect fluid motion stuttered, then stopped entirely. He was paralyzed. The ground trembled as another massive form approached from the north. Through the network connection, Ren could feel its hunger, its desperate need to join with its siblings and become something greater. In that moment of vulnerability, the fourth artifact arrived,